Welcome in episode 3. We're going to continue to evolve this conversation around secure access. We're primarily focused on the SonicWall product called Cloud Secure Edge, but from a high level, we want to bring the audience here this conversation with you, our Chief Information Security Officers, around like what we're doing for security and how you think about this and maybe some experience you've had in the past. Wayson, we're going to dive right in. We've got some pre-prepared kind of prompting questions. You've got a lot of information to share with the team, but maybe when you think about the industry, let's say like the IT industry or the IT adjacent industry, why are people maybe slow to recognize that on-site users, maybe on-premise users, have a level of risk that is the same or maybe sometimes greater than remote users? And then, customers have been making this transition post-COVID. There's probably still some blind spots out there. What's your thoughts around those?
Yeah, JT. I don't know if you recall, about a year ago, or maybe a little under a year ago, I kicked off Zero Trust internally, and
I remember your video. Yeah, it came into my thing. I'm like, oh gosh, what is this? Scary.
Yeah, and in there I talked about historically castle and moat's been the approach, but if you recall in there, I said to me the battle's different today. You need dragons today in order to survive, right? Castle and moats just kind of that's kind of an older way. I is how I look at it, and so to me, I think some of what may be slowing to recognize is just kind of that old thinking, right? That if I'm inside the network, it just means I'm automatically trusted, and really that's it's just kind of to me just not kind of a modern approach. Like I said this in some of the other the webinars we had, right? Just do more with less. There's certainly that. And things are just getting complicated and harder around segmentation and how do you do that and your infrastructure, and so you're looking at there's just a lot of things around skills and gaps. So there's certainly a lot of certainly things facing us, but I think it's kind of centered around just really kind of the older way of looking at, and like I said, you need dragons today, and the things are constant today, right? And so
16-foot deep perimeter around your core security stuff doesn't really exist anymore, right? You got farmers out in the field. You need just coverage. You need something that kind of sees above all of it. I like that analogy.
To kind of answer the second part, you asked about blind spot. I think I think the core blind spot is just really centers around on-prem. That is right. It still relies on kind of implicit trust, really, in the end, right? And there's all these other things going on, and so you kind of think that thing you had there is fine, and it just might not be, right? I mean, your east and west traffic could be invisible. I think about identities, kind of weaker, on-prem might, the all that proverbial service accounts, right? That just might be hidden disasters there. The privileged access you got to think about, right? So you look at all of those type of things. The core, kind of the core blind spot is just for on-prem, at least when I think about it, is just assuming your trust scales, and it really doesn't, right? And go look at when the cloud first came out. That's one thing I really liked. They kind of, to me, they looked at it, they took it on from a different view, and I think it's actually far more mature than what's on-prem, right? And so you got to kind of turn that around, and so that's the way I kind of look at that.
Yeah, from talking with some of our clients, one of the challenges that they have there is just complexity, right? It's almost like to move that direction is challenging, and people naturally kind of be like, what's the easiest way I can accomplish task X? And that's, I think, your blind spot there about the fact that the on-premise needs to evolve at the same pace or maybe even greater than what you do in the cloud. And people are buying all kinds of cool cloud security tools because they're worried about it, and that's where their investments are going. And they sometimes neglectful of even just those on-premise environments. They just kind of assume like, oh, I own this hardware, and therefore there's not risk.
Right. Nope.
So, insider threats, there's lots of, that's like a loaded topic. But when we're talking about insider threats, we're just, what's maybe becoming more dangerous around people being on premise? And from your perspective, how does zero trust and zero trust network access maybe change the way that people are able to think about trusted internal users primarily?
Yeah. So inside threats are always a unique one, right? Because everybody trusts the people you work with and talk to, especially when you're in the office. You see them on a daily basis. But go look at the last 12 months. I'm going to stay away from names of companies so you can go figure this stuff out. But there's a cyber company that got privileged access management misuse, basically, right? An employee leaked internal screenshots to threat actors. There was a bank that had failed offboarding, so they basically didn't do a post-termination, and someone they stole sensitive data, essentially. There was a crypto company where an employee got bribed. And so there was user data stolen there, right? So that like things are still happening inside. As much as you may think you have total trust with insiders, you still need to pay attention to it. And so when I think about how zero trust changes it, and it kind of builds off of what I was saying earlier. It's like the inside trust, just because you're inside, you're trusted. Like no, that's not it, right? And so no users trusted should be the approach, right? And so products like CSE can help you with that, right? Kind of break that old model of the kind of that single VPN approach that gives you access to everything. That to me, that starts to really change, and kind of help protect you against the insider the threat, right? So think about the access itself, and it'd be more identity centric, right? Outlook, let's ship, that's one area. How about apps, right? And you don't get this access to all the apps, right? So again, you're concentrating on that. So to me, I look at something like CSE, it kind of removes the assumptions for you, right? I mean, in terms of fewer entitlements, there's fewer places to hide for misuse. Your blast radius essentially is smaller now. So it becomes, it becomes operational when you think about it, right? Like your operation is better.
Yeah, so, in our pre-call, you had mentioned, and I know we'll talk about this as we go, we'll probably bring it up a couple more times, but that concept of trust scoring, and maybe being able to know, like when we think of like what a trusted endpoint is, historically it was like, oh, if this person's plugged into like my internal network, right, through Ethernet or wireless or whatever, like I'm going to give them access to certain things because they're on my local network. And you were talking about it, it's like maybe that's not the way that we should be thinking about security moving forward. So maybe you can talk to people about the trust factors here and just kind of what that builds out to be.
Yeah, that trust score itself, that's something we rely on heavily internally. And it's been actually a great, a huge win and surprise for us that oh man, that was actually when you start figuring out. So you're basically your posture, right? So your location, your context, you know more now, right? In terms of location, what you're trying to access, and you can restrict a lot of that down, and you get this trust score. So kind of the way we look at it is your security posture. For everyone, we look at that and then
are you running an EDR tool? I know I've gotten in trouble traveling. It's like, hey, are you in a geography that the company supports? Are you logged in and are you authenticated? You mentioned identity being a critical piece. Obviously, that's still essential. But then also, are you running the latest version of Windows? Or have you updated your machine? You know how employees are. They click ignore. And eventually, even a corporate-owned device just shifts. And you mentioned that shift, that like the drift away from compliance or from this trust. CSE has the capabilities to enforce that. And it's not that you can't do it through some other tool that's in the infrastructure, but it's like those are typically disjointed pieces of information that CSE helps put together.
And I'll give you a little bit more example too for those of you.
You love the examples.
You actually said it too, right? Where you can do it with other tools. So I look at we all have the amateur IT person who's like, oh, my laptop is slow, so I want to get rid of this EDR agent. I don't need it. Where you can. Previously, you could take it off, and then you have some policy that comes up every time it gets rechecked that says, "Hey, you don't have antivirus," and it reloads it, right? So you have Intune or things like that can do that, and that's fine. That somewhat catches it. I think the difference is CSE just cuts you off,
right?
So the moment it's gone, you don't get access. So you immediately teach the user to leave things alone. You're immediately protected no matter what time of day, right? You don't have to be on shift to see that. So I think that's a huge difference in other tools can kind of do it, but it'd be great if it just automatically cut it off, right? And so, that's a real, really, to me, a real good selling point, right?
I was kind of laughing about that insider threat. I mean, even that like amateur IT person, that's an insider threat. It's not a malicious thing. They're just like, oh, I want my Excel file to load 5 seconds faster, so I'm going to turn off the EDR tool so I get 2 megs of memory more or whatever. Like, they're not trying to be malicious, but they are causing a pretty substantial threat inside the network.
No, definitely.
So, we're going to keep building on that because I think overwhelmingly on the zero trust network access side, we've had a lot of clients, prospects, and customers coming to us talking about modernizing VPN, right? Remote access. And where I think we're trying to make sure the audience here is educated and kind of can take that out to their customers is that there's also a big portion of those people which might not need like VPN access or remote connectivity necessarily, but organizations are assuming that these corporate owned devices are safe. And then, maybe from your perspective, we'll build on some of that stuff we talked about earlier, but what's the mistake there? Where do people go wrong thinking like, hey, I sent a corporate machine out and it's safe now?
Well, I mean, the first thing is you're never safe, right? The first thing that's a bunch of jumps out of me, right? I mean, like, man, threat actors, like, they're so creative. They got their tools, it's just, they just got so many advanced things. Heck, they're well funded today, right? That's crazy. And look, come on, corporate owned can be compromised, right? So, and then not to mention, there's nothing standalone today, right? Everything's connected to something. So, so the safe, but I get where your question's going. I'll answer it, but
thanks.
But honestly, like to stay on devices for a second, those drift out of compliance, right? And so you want something checking on that. Heck, things could be compromised already in some respects, and unfortunately, and so so if you can kind of grant trust continuously, that certainly helps you there. And then there's like a binary approach to like devices, right? We're like, hey, I'm in corporate, so I'm trusted, and BYOD is restricted, right? But I'd rather have like the risk scoring, the behavior monitoring. We just talked about a little bit earlier, right? The security posture through like the trust score, right? And so to me, that's again where it shines. And so when you look at like just the devices itself, and you want to shift that mindset out of like, hey, it's been like this for a long time. We're fine. It never happened to us before, and you need to move more into the kind of safer actions. Right? Is this device behaving safely or not, right? And for this specific action, right, whatever it may be. So.
You talked about some we were talking earlier, and it was like this idea that, as you built IT security, it's like you have your VLANs and your IP-based security, and then you have like your user credential security, and then you got like these different stacked layers. And that's where that complexity for a lot of organizations came from, which is like, which layer of security am I relying on to prevent action X, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
From my perspective, a lot of our customers, where CSE is really starting to drive value is, it's like, can we collapse some of that so that we have like a consistent place where we build policy? It's not that the policy didn't exist. It's just like it was in this one area, and making sure that it's consistently enforced across all devices is challenging.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, definitely does.
When we talked a little bit ago about one other kind of scenario, which was sometimes there are like user experience related stuff, right? Your users, when they're connecting from home, to go through a bunch of hoops and jumps to get on their personal device, right? But then they go get on their corporate machine and they just get connected right away. It's like, is that user higher risk or lower risk? Or are you just making an assumption because they're on the corporate machine? I think that speaks to that binary piece you're talking about.
Sure. Yep. Definitely.
I promised Jerry, the gentleman that helps organize all these things, that I'd take a break at the midway point and encourage the audience to ask questions. So if you're sitting there going, I don't even know what trust score I would do, or I have a policy, could CSE enforce X? Why don't you post that into the chat? And as we move forward, Wayson and I will go through and say yes or no. So if you've got a question like, hey, can it make sure that I have my EDR tool installed? The answer is yes. But if you got some other questions like, hey, we have policy X, we want to make sure it's enforced, is that something we can do? We'll go through and play kind of stump the chump there. So, Wayson, when we're talking about like, CSE applying this policy across both on-premise and contractors and BYOD, bring your own device services, and applying that consistent policy to the way that people access it, why do you think, from your perspective, like consistency is important? And maybe what have you seen in the past that doesn't work, or maybe falls apart or breaks down?
Yeah, I think look, all of our I don't know all exactly who's on the call in the audience here, but you're here for certainly the CSE part, but just in a security role, and so therefore one of the biggest things we're trying to do is lower risk, right? So that's the thing I think of is like, hey, how do you lower that? And so being consistent is big, right? So think about like things that how do you collapse your attack surface, right? So how you want every control enforcing user, your service, identity itself, those identities, we talked about device posture, context around location, time, behavior, right? And so you kind of get away from that, once you're inside, everything is reachable, and so you get a much better posture there. I think of things like, it aligns, kind of detection across the stack. You kind of mentioned it a little there, JT, right around like you have IP-based rules, user-based rules, device rules, and instead you want things to correlate. You want the behaviors, kind of you have to have a baseline in there, right? So that way anomalies can stand out and can be detected. So I think it forces like least privilege, to kind of really exist too in terms of having consistency there, right? And so, like, to me, you no longer have to hide, the kind of broad access, right? It's kind of all like internal, right? And so, who actually needs this, right? That's kind of the stuff gets answered, right? This is kind of standalone, And so to me, that's like things you do is where you start reducing your risk. And I think one thing I think of too, when I look at kind of how we have things set up, the CSE being connected to the firewall, right, is another level of consistencies, right, in terms of how things are designed, and so it makes it easier for us. Go back to what I said earlier. I am definitely in the do more with less. I'm like most IT shops, and that like you have to figure out how to do more with less, right? And look, whether IT and security separate or led by someone different, in the end they have to work together. Security is going to be asking for things, and IT's got to go do it. But hey, if it's all integrated and it's consistent, that makes things so much easier. It's easier to understand. So yeah, it's a huge piece to this, definitely.
Yeah, and for the audience here, you might be scratching your head going like, hey, what is CSE? So just as a way that we've kind of helped to achieve those, the way the product's licensed and the way that it's built, it's a license per user, meaning that a single user can have multiple devices. It works on your mobile devices, right? Android, iOS. It works on Linux, Windows, Mac devices. So the idea is that we're trying to make it simpler for the IT department to just say, I've got 250 users, I have 2,000 users, whatever the amount is, and I don't know what devices they're going to want to connect from today or tomorrow, but I know that I have a consistent policy for when that user profile connects to what they can access. And as long as they meet this level of trust, the trust score that our tool provides, then they can have access to those resources. And if they don't, IT gets to know, we get to flag, we can help that user troubleshoot or remediate that issue, or the user can do some self-remediation depending on what the service it impacts. So just so everyone knows, that's what we're talking about today. It's a single agent. It lives on the device, and it helps facilitate that. It can also do remote connectivity. It can also do DNS security. But really, I think the part we're trying to highlight is that trust score. Can I get some consistency around the device that's connecting to my network? What do I know about it, and can I control it? So, Wayson, a lot of people, we start talking to, especially customers who are like, hey, I'm interested. I know this is a project. I've got zero trust on my mind. It's something I want to do, but I don't want to rip up all the work we've done. To your point of doing more with less, I've got a team of people that are trained on using this. Like, I don't want to rip and replace what I've got going on. What's your maybe talking points with them? What would you say to those folks that are in that scenario?
Yeah, that's I think like I can understand why folks are saying that. Right? I'll be honest. Maybe I get on my little soapbox for a little second here. Right? I think there's a little to me. I'll just say certain agencies that rate tools. I'll stay away from names. In any kind of media publication, I think I'm not a fan of ZTNA being the highlight because I think it takes away that kind of limits zero trust when you just talk about ZTNA. It's the only kind of product base out there that has that acronym tied to it. When to me, zero trust is such this bigger thing, and I think what a lot of those vendors do is they kind of centralize it around identity, and I'm like, nah, it's just way more than that. I mean, JT, we talked about that dragon in my little video thing. If you recall from something there, like to me, I thought like a lot of people think employees are the weakest link, and they very well maybe, but like zero trust means never trust, always verify. Well, that applies to email. So if you get your employees just thinking that model in their head when they go and check email, that's zero trust right there, right? So you can do more than just identities on that. Anyways, all right, jump off. So I'll answer your question. But seriously, a little bit of I think what I just said kind of makes it you kind of miss. There's a more of a myth around it, right? And to me, I think the reality of it is I don't see it as disruptive. I really don't. I see it as I think there's certainly a mindset shift and change that needs to happen, right? And I think you're on it. When you take a step back and think about it, you're building on your existing controls, right? Whatever your IAM, strengthening MFA, maybe moving to passkeys, whatever you're doing, your firewalls, all those kinds of things, right? And so moving away from VPN to something like CSE and kind of doing a lot of that. So you're really like the rip and replace. That's not a rip and replace, right? It's to me, you treat it as just kind of an evolutionary strategy in terms of getting better, right? And I go back to where I said, we deploy CSE internally. Like one of the very first things we did, when it came out, was we took all contractors immediately and said, hey, you're not gonna be on our VPN. We're gonna put you on CSE so we can control you, in that area. So yeah, I mean, I can kind of see why, but
I love that comment about starting with someone. I think maybe sometimes when I hear it from customers, it is part of it is like, hey, I don't want to disrupt everything I built, right? A lot of these people have been with the organizations they support for long times, or maybe they're the reseller partner that helped deploy a security model. And so I like your thing of saying, hey, zero trust is this maybe philosophy almost that's we're just improving upon what's already there. And there are some tools that will change. And one of them might be the CSE infrastructure. How do I enforce these policies, right? I always joke in audiences when I have a group of IT folks, I'm like, how many of you have acceptable use policies? Most everyone raises their hand. How many of you have a AI policy in there? 50% of the room has done that so far, a little bit behind. And I'm like, how many of you are confident that your employees follow that guidance? And it's two people that are the super invested kind of front of it. Otherwise it's hard. These aren't new concepts, but they are enforcement points. And I know there's customers that even for things like multi-factor authentication, which living in the security space feels like everyone should have, and it's like a no-brainer. There are business leaders and organizations which are still just so resistant to it because it's a change in process. So I think your piece on the front, the soapbox part, which is it is a mindset that the organization needs to undertake first, is really important.
Yeah, and I would say, JT, to everyone out there, when you think about it, there's still some of us in some shape or form struggle from the past, right? Where IT and security was the department of no, right? And the reality, what you want to be today is no, we're business enablers. That's what we do, right? So how do you do things and improve your posture and not disrupt employees, right? And how do you if you're doing combining things or companies, and how do I make things less disruptive? How do we enable the business? And so I think everybody knows perimeter based security's changed, right? It's kind of more identity centric. So again, how do you progress that? And I think it's a mind shift change when I think about it, is like, look at it as like, okay, how do I enable, right? That's a super strong message to pass on to your internal employees and your leadership, your executives. And then the other thing that jumps out to me is like just being resilient, right? In doing that. This is another layer of being resilient, right? So you're faster actually when you do things, right? You get I'll go back to the example earlier, you get notified quicker, right? And things like that. So like, you're trying to make things seamless and more resilient. You're enabling the business. Those are all extremely powerful things that you can do. And it really elevates your org and gets you away from that no, right? Like, oh, that's just, don't ask them. I'm going to do it on my own, because they're a no org, right? And so you get out of that when you start doing things like this, right?
Yeah. And, I had a note in here talking about, hey, remind people that if they have SonicWall infrastructure, they get more out of the investment. You mentioned the firewall connects with CSE. It's all in a single pane of glass management. But something I thought about while you were talking there is, I honestly view CSE as a product, actually as a way to make sure you get the investment and the maximum value out of other services, whether they're SonicWall or not, in your infrastructure. The one I think of a lot is like your EDR tool. Go back to our conversation earlier. If you got an employee that's turning off the EDR agent and disabling it, the company's paying for this level of risk reduction in a tool. And if it's being disabled, you're losing just value that you've already paid for. And so something like zero trust network access and the trust scoring also just helps to make sure that the investment that the company's already made is being upheld. And the risk reduction that leadership has bought into, and the CIO and CISOs have put into place, or that your risk mitigation departments have put into, they're actually being leveraged. A lot of customers, I think, they buy the shiny object that quarter, that month, that year, and they think they solved the problem, and then they find out, oh, we've only got 60% adoption on this tool, and we aren't even using it to the level we spent. So that's something that's come up a few times. We helped an insurance agency on the East Coast with that recently. They were looking for EDR tool, and it was something like half of their employees had like the updated EDR agent on there, and they were rolling it out through group policy, but it's just people hit ignore, and they didn't have the policy to enforce the latest version, and that's a massive risk to the business. And
sure,
from the IT professionals in the space, business owners, they expect those tools to be running. Like, if you don't have a way to enforce it or hold them accountable to it, they're not too forgiving of that. They're like, we approved budget for this last year. So I think that's an area that I just kind of thought about.
No.
So, Wayson, kind of last question. Again, I encourage the audience, if you've got some questions for Wayson or myself around CSE, or maybe how it might apply to your infrastructure, feel free to start queuing them up now. But from your perspective, Wayson, when someone successfully starts adopting zero trust, and maybe we'll focus a little bit more on zero trust network access because that's where CSE is, but when someone starts successfully adopting that model or that mindset, is there some maybe hidden things that they gain they don't know about? Obviously, there's things the tool does, but is there some stuff that just kind of comes out of the woodwork or that you're aware of that was unexpected from the start?
Yeah, I think it's a little different for me. Like, when I think about that question. So, like, you're right. Like, application ownership gets fixed, right? You access clarity. You transform that, right? You talk about third party, that kind of stuff. So your on-premise stuff gets, you certainly you get stronger there. Going down this, your credit. Go back to my mindset thing. You change that. Your credibility rises as an org, right? And when you look at all those things, you're kind of expecting, like, what you kind of don't realize is the greatest value that it's providing you. I'm going to say specifically adopting CSE and ZTNA kind of stuff. It's really it forces discipline around trust, right? You change that model. And to me, go back to what I said earlier, you're trying to reduce risk, right? And so this is a way to reduce that, where you remove a lot of the assumptions, you get out of that old castle mode, and on top of that, you're not disrupting the business. So I think when you look at all those good things, like when you kind of go a little bit underneath, it's really like the discipline around trust now, right? It's a different approach. And I think you may not realize that because you've seen all these other tangible things you can point to. You're fundamentally changing like your culture internally within your security posturing and your team and stuff. So I think to me, that's kind of what stands out, right? It's not one tangible thing that it's just kind of like, hey, you actually transformed internally, right? Like
you summon the dragon to defend your country. That's cool. I love that. So I know there's a group of people that are snowed in right now, right? There's a bunch of people that are impacted from their ability to work. If you've got time or you're looking for a way to improve that security or you want to take the first step, I do want to remind everyone that on mysonicwall.com, there's an option to utilize a free trial, no strings attached. You don't have to talk to anybody. You just click free trial. And you'll get access to some seats of our CSE product. So as an IT decision maker or your team, they can use the tool to decide whether or not it's functional for your organization and just to evaluate it and see where it fits to start. That's a 30-day trial. Again, there's no strings attached, so you just use it. There is also guided demos available. They should be linked in the chat to the side. You can do a guided tour through the product. Maybe you don't want to do a full demo, but you just like to see a little bit more of the technical piece of it, or you'd like someone to walk you through the function of the product. That's available for you as well. And then you can watch the previous episodes or subscribe to the future episodes of our conversation here. We do have a couple more coming up where we've just broken down different aspects of the tool, how it impacts IT as a whole. And we've had Wayson to help guide us along from a practitioner standpoint to help connect the dots on, real world versus me and the marketing team putting together kind of our sales positioning for the product. You are welcome to put more questions into the chat. I haven't seen any queue up yet, but if you have a question, if there's something that's kind of there at the end of your mind and you'd like to document it, you can. If you'd like someone from SonicWall to reach out to you to help you guide you through this process, you can also just say, hey, reach out to me in the chat, and that allows us to connect you with a SonicWall sales representative. Let me see if I have anything else. Oh, questions. I knew there was a slide that said questions somewhere in there, Wayson. I'll allow them a little bit of time there, Wayson. I love the conversation with you because it's a nice reminder that there's a business, like a job to be done for these IT folks, right? The people that we're selling to in a lot of cases. And as much as we want them to buy our shiny object, our item, helping to educate people and kind of talk through some of this stuff, it's important. I learned a lot today from you just thinking about some of the ways that you're approaching the security of our company. And so thanks for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for having me. It looks like a question pop up.
Yeah, it's a real good one. Is there any chance we can get a "That's what she said" from the guy with the mustache, just like Michael Scott? Let me see. Let me get into my Michael Scott character progression. That's what she said. I don't know. That's about as good as I can do. Mike, if you call me directly and you tell me a good joke, I'll respond with it. That's what she said. Love it. Thanks, Mike. Now you're going to get. We're going to summon the SonicWall sales dogs onto you just as a payback for that activity. All right, I'll give it like another 33 seconds, and then we'll wrap solidly at 36 minutes if there is no additional questions. Reminder, these things are also available on demand, which means that you can watch them at your leisure. So if you are watching on demand, but you have a question, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can send me an email at jfanning@sonicwall.com, or you can post something here in the chat, and I think we do still get that. Wayson, if people wanted to connect with you, if people wanted to see you, what's your preferred mechanism of interaction?
Yeah, just ping me on LinkedIn. That'd probably be the easiest. Yeah, no, well, we can go from there, and I can, we can do that. That'd probably be the easiest.
You have to be internationally recognized and famous. People asking you about risk reduction. Hey, my CTO doesn't want to do X, Y, Z. What's your recommendation for talking?
Yeah, I can help with that kind of stuff. Definitely. Hey, we have to work together, regardless of what we definitely gotta stay ahead of them. We're trying to
stay ahead of the threat actors.
I stay with them at least.
Or the people, the money men. All right, Wayson, we've belabored this enough, folks. Right. We appreciate the the time. Wayson, I'm going to give you the parting shots, and then I'll end the talk.
Yeah, one last comment. Like I think of when I'm trying to help here, like in terms of especially centered around CSE, you don't treat it as a like a program. Don't treat it as as an upgrade or a connectivity upgrade. Don't look at it through those lens. Look at it as the kind of transformational program. You know, like again, go back to what I was saying earlier about kind of iterating through things, right? So look at it as that through those lens, and not like, hey, I'm just upgrading. Like, no, it's transformational. See, you know, learn that and see that. I think it's going to make a difference for you.
Perfect. And Jerry, just I know how technology people are. They wait till the last possible minute. They wait till the last second. So Jerry did have a question here. He said, how do we determine in the authentication logs that our users are logging in from an OK location if it goes through CSE for risky logins? Jerry, the way that it actually works is the trust score is set up with a policy. And if the user is outside of your zone, let's say it's the United States, for example, in North America, they're connecting from somewhere else. They are assigned a trust level. And then that can be whatever you want it to be. Let's say it's low. You don't want to allow connections. The user actually is never able to connect to the resource, but you do get a log within the CSE dashboard that lets you know someone tried to log in from out of band destination. Alternatively, you can just turn on logging and to know who's hitting from outside of your region without blocking that user. So you can get an alert there, but there's no action to be taken in those scenarios. So I think there's two ways you can get it done. One is just like an alert that says, hey, JT logged in from Mexico. Are you aware of that, basically? The other option would be I would try to log in from Mexico to reach an app or an application or a service, and it would just not allow me to do so. And it would tell me as the user that I'm not in a geography that the company supports. And then IT also gets notified that I kind of hit that rule. So hopefully that answers your question. Wayson, I don't know if you have anything.
I think you did it. I think you did it well. Yeah.
Perfect. And Frank, yeah, it's not an upgrade, it's a glow up. Okay, we got a lot of jokes coming into the chat, so I do like the jokes, right? Between the that's what she said and a glow up. I mean, we're modernizing it, right? We had how many questions did we have, Wayson? 6, 7. Okay, we gotta stop. We gotta get through. Can't allow this to continue. So, audience, again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Wayson, again, thank you very much. It was a great time. We'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. See you, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Stay warm.